Greens everyone, Sylvan Dance 98, back at it again with another reaction. We're looking at the top 10 most mature Kamen Rider seasons. And yeah, for some reason, Amazon is on there. I don't know why.
What is the most mature Kamen Rider season of all time? Throughout the 50-year history of Kamen Rider, we've had quite a few seasons that were family-friendly, but we've also had some that were not for kids. Whether it's due to dark themes, excessive violence, or things that might give kids nightmares, this is a list of the most mature, darkest, most adult-oriented Kamen Rider seasons of all time. And of course, let me know what your favorite mature Kamen Rider season is in the comments. But without further ado, let's get into it.
Decade?
Number 10 is Kamen Rider Decade. This season doesn't necessarily have anything super violent or dark, but it does have a very nice, gritty tone that I appreciate. There's something that I can't quite put my finger on about this series, but it just has that vibe, man. This is of course an anniversary season, representing 10 years of the Heisei era, and there were only 31 episodes, so the story moves kind of fast. But I think the simple fact that it exists amongst the Riderverse gives a really good story that I think adults will appreciate a lot more than the younger crowd.
True enough.
Kamen Rider X!
Next up at number 9 is Kamen Rider X, or X Rider. In this series, Keisuke fights the Government of Darkness, and he was betrayed by his fiancée, who was helping them. He became mortally wounded, and his father, who was a robotics expert, turned him into X Rider in order to save his life. But his father would ultimately succumb to his injuries and die.
Kamen Rider X にセットアップするのだ。
Keisuke is driven to avenge his father and defeat the Government of Darkness, and this is just a really good old-school revenge plot as we watch Keisuke/X Rider dismantle the Government of Darkness as a focused and ruthless Kamen Rider with no mercy left in his heart. Strangely enough, his father's personality lives on inside of a supercomputer called Keen Station, which is part of an island. In my opinion, this series has kind of just a hopeless vibe. Not really over the top with things, but definitely a story that adults would appreciate a lot more than kids, because it's so dark and depressing at times.
Fair enough.
Next up at number 8 is the original Kamen Rider. This series is of course absolutely iconic, featuring two riders, Takeshi and Hayato, as they go up against Shocker and later Gel Shocker. This series even has a fat 98 episodes.
仮面ライダー今度は何をしようとするんだショッカーの怪物め
This series starts with Takeshi, but he got injured and was replaced later on by Hayato, and eventually they would team up.
ライダーキー
If you've seen the series, then you probably already understand why it's on this list. This show is extremely dark, but also campy at the same time. There's a lot of seriousness, but they don't take themselves too seriously. That being said, we do have people being kidnapped by Shocker, we have people being crucified, and I would say that in general, the vibe is pretty gritty.
隼人本郷
And I would say overall, this is a series that adults are going to appreciate more than kids will.
True enough.
henshin
Next up at number 7 is Kamen Rider Yuki, a series that is extremely popular amongst fans of Rider vs. Rider battles, and there are tons of riders here. On this show, riders travel to the mirror world via reflective surfaces, but the reason that the series is on the mature side is because of the nature of the rider war itself. Riders die a lot on this show. Basically, one of these riders will get a wish granted, but they have to be the last one alive. Not to mention that Oja might genuinely terrify a little kid. He's just that maniacal and deranged. Next up at number 6 is Phys. On this show, the Smart Brain organization is trying to take over the world by replacing humans with orphanox, or the next stage of human evolution. I think that premise alone is something that would terrify a lot of kids. But of course, Smart Brain creates 3 suits called Rider Gear. These are Phys, Delta, and Kaiza. Now, I think the story of Takumi and Kamen Rider Phys is very interesting and deep, but this show doesn't have a lot of the flashiness and the bells and whistles that a little kid would probably be looking for in Kamen Rider, especially one that's used to Reiwa era shows. Next up at number 5 is Gaim. This is a show about dancing fruit samurai with a surprisingly dark tone at times, but somehow, even though the show gets so dark and depressing, it still remains charming and accessible. basically in the world of Gaim, reality in general is pretty crap and people are just depressed all around. So they form dance troops to kind of liven up the community, and one of these troops is called Gaim.
That makes sense.
Kota is our hero, who becomes Kamen Rider Gaim, and he becomes very powerful. Now, Gaim is kind of in a weird place, because the show has a lot of dark undertones, and things that kids might not understand, so it's like the dark stuff is there for the older audience, but then they have the fruit theme and the dancing, so that the younger crowd can have something to enjoy as well. And I think that they combine these themes absolutely masterfully, and it makes for one of the most well-balanced shows in the history of the franchise. But that being said, even though the show has the lighter elements, it still has some very dark and heavy undertones and story elements that will genuinely cause some adults to think about the story, and it'll resonate with you on a deeper level. So I think that's why it belongs on this list. Next up at number 4 is Agito. This is of course a direct sequel of Kuga, despite the continuity errors, and this show features 3, or 4 if you want to be technical, vastly different writers.
Details.
What I love about Agito is there's kind of a dark, military thriller undertone to this series that I really appreciate. Not only do we deal with the obvious things like combat, but there's also story elements revolving around the politics of military organizations, as well as drama within research and development. These are things that honestly I'm not sure a little kid would be super interested in, but for an adult, I find these story elements to be very interesting, and they compelled me to watch more Agito.
Well, there we go. That makes sense.
Next up at number 3 is Kamen Rider Kuga, a new hero, a new legend. When this series came out, it was the first Kamen Rider series in 11 years, and it kicked off the Heisei era. The story here is about Yusuke Godai finding an ancient artifact that allowed him to become Kuga so he could battle the Gorongi, or the unidentified lifeforms if you prefer. This was the last Kamen Rider series to only feature a single rider, because after this series, all of the other Kamen Rider series would feature multiple riders. This is one of the reasons that I think that this is a series that's better fitting for adults than for kids, because I feel like young viewers want to have tons and tons of riders and tons of pieces of equipment, which is fine, but I feel like an older audience can appreciate a strong, well-written story with a smaller cast. And boy, does this show have a well-written story. This show also has a very, very dark, gritty tone that I appreciate a lot, and the cinematography and direction of the series is almost perfect. Everything just looks good, everything is just shot well, and I feel like an adult is going to appreciate these qualities a lot more than a kid would.
Fair. Yep.
Number 2 is Kamen Rider Amazon. This was of course
Only
the
number
shortest
2?
Kamen Rider series, and also the most violent. Basically, if you've seen Kamen Rider Amazon, then I probably don't even need to explain to you why it's right here. This series is about a man named Daisuke, who was lost in the Amazon, orphaned at a young age, and raised by wild animals before eventually being adopted by an Incan tribe. Nearly his entire village would eventually be killed by Golgos, but not before an elder performs a ritual to give him the power to become Kamen Rider Amazon. This show has a reputation for being extremely violent, and it's kind of a cult classic in a way because of that. And if you watch this show, you will see very quickly why it's on this list. But you know, not every show can make this list, so here's a few honorable mentions. I'm gonna put Kamen Rider Black Sun on this list because it is extremely violent, but it's also a reboot. And I'm also gonna put Kamen Rider Amazons on this list for the exact same reasons. This was a reboot of Amazon, and is still quite violent. Next we have Shin Kamen Rider Prologue. This film celebrated the 20th anniversary of the franchise, and they were trying to attract fans of the original series that had become adults. Because of this, they went for a much darker and more violent tone than on the show, and we have a story in which Shin Kazumatsuri is fused with grasshopper DNA against his will, leading him to fight against the Institute of Super Science, or ISS. Shotaro Ishinomori originally wanted him to be called Kamen Rider Gaia with a more traditional look, but this was changed to Kamen Rider Shin, and they gave him a much more biological and insect-like look. As I said, this movie was intentionally targeting adults, and because of that it's quite violent, with an incredibly dark and gritty tone. And then we have Shin Kamen Rider, the 2023 film, which is a retelling of the original Kamen Rider series, with a dark and mature tone, and extreme amounts of blood and violence. If you've never seen this movie, literally watch 3 minutes and you will know why it's on this list.
I saw the trailer, yeah.
But the number one most mature Kamen Rider season, Kamen Rider Black. Is it the most violent? No, but it has a dark tone that fits the name of the show perfectly well.
どうしたブラックさん生き返って強くなったのはその程度か
This series feels dark and bleak and hopeless. We have a story about Minami Kotaro trying to redeem his brother, who has been corrupted and turned into Shadow Moon. This series gets insane amounts of hype, and I think that most of it is justified, because there's not a lot of stronger motivation than trying to save your family. And I think because of that, the story here feels incredibly grounded and realistic, despite being a Kamen Rider show. And it has a strong heaviness that will cause you to root for Minami Kotaro and really become invested in the story.
That's fair.
The outro of the show has a very somber and almost depressing song that, to be honest, fits the series very, very well. Because even when Minami Kotaro wins, it never really feels all that optimistic. The mood is just black. But you know what? That's just what I think. Let me know what you think is the most mature Kamen Rider season in the comments. And if you enjoy this video, it would mean tons to me if you would smack the out of that like button.
I won't lie. It's a pretty solid list based on what I've seen of some of the shows, the trailers, and the other compilation videos I've seen here and there. But yeah, I'm just like, jeez, as soon as I saw the monster death in Amazon, I'm just like, ooh. So lots of blue blood there. Ooh. Anywho, hope you guys enjoyed that. I certainly did. Looking forward to seeing what you guys think of as we go to the next video, which is going to be a Jade Animations 2-player Nuzlocke. This should be fun. You guys take care. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!